When my friend Ryan disappeared, my life turned upside down. He had vanished without a trace, and no clues emerged about where he could be. Weeks dragged on, and I didn't know what else to do. Ryan and I had been inseparable, and the emptiness he left behind was impossible to ignore. The police were involved, but with so little information, the investigation seemed to go in circles. In desperation to find him, I decided to try something different. I logged into Omegle. It was a stupid idea, I know, but I had heard rumors that sometimes people involved in mysterious cases showed up in those chats. The idea sounded absurd, but I was desperate, and the hope of finding some lead, no matter how small, pushed me to keep going. I spent hours on the site, jumping from conversation to conversation, asking about Ryan, describing what he looked like, but most people just ignored me or thought I was joking. After an entire night of fruitless searching, I was about to give up. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, when the screen loaded once more and a new user appeared. His camera was off. At first, I thought it would be another waste of time. But then, the person typed something that made my heart stop. "You're looking for Ryan, aren't you?" I froze. My stomach churned, and my hands began to shake. How did he know? None of the previous conversations had suggested anyone recognized me or knew Ryan. I tried to stay calm and typed back, asking who he was and how he knew about Ryan. The stranger didn't respond immediately. Instead, he started describing intimate details of Ryan's life. He mentioned things that very few people knew, like the nickname his mother used when he was a kid and how Ryan always brought the same book to read at the park. Each sentence he typed was more unsettling than the last. I began to sweat, trying to figure out if this was some kind of sick joke or something far darker. Then the stranger wrote something that made the ground fall out from beneath me. "I know where he is." My heart raced. My fingers trembled as I asked where Ryan was. The answer came quickly, without hesitation. "If you want to know, go to the abandoned park tomorrow night. But go alone." I knew the park he was talking about. It was a place Ryan and I used to go when we were younger before the city shut it down. The park was a few miles outside of town, surrounded by trees, isolated. A place no one went anymore. My gut told me this was dangerous, that it didn't make sense, but part of me desperately wanted to go there. I needed to know what had happened to Ryan. Before I could respond or ask any more questions, the stranger ended the conversation. I tried to reconnect, but he had vanished. I sat there, staring at the screen, panic rising inside me. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the park, about the stranger's words, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to run there immediately, but the other part, the rational part, knew I couldn't take that risk. The next day, I told my mom what had happened, and she begged me not to go. Deep down, I knew she was right, but something inside me couldn't stop thinking about the stranger's words. How did he know so much about Ryan? What if he really knew where Ryan was? Even though it was dangerous, I had to tell the police. I went to the station and explained everything that had happened. At first, the officers were skeptical, but when I mentioned the abandoned park, something changed in the investigator's eyes. He told me they would check the area immediately. I spent the rest of the day waiting, anxious, hoping that all of this wasn't just a cruel joke. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was the investigator. His voice was grave, and he asked me to come to the station. When I got there, the news I received shattered any remaining hope I had. Ryan's body had been found at the park, exactly where the stranger had indicated. They didn't go into detail about the condition he was found in, but from the expression on the officers' faces, I knew it hadn't been a peaceful death. My head was spinning. How could someone on Omegle know so much? How did he know where Ryan was? Questions bubbled up in my mind, but no one had answers. The police promised to investigate, but I knew it wouldn't bring Ryan back. They tried to trace the person I'd spoken to, but as expected, the account had been created anonymously and disappeared shortly after. The days that followed were a blur of pain and confusion. Part of me blamed myself for not doing more, for not going to the park myself, for not preventing it from happening. But deep down, I knew I couldn't have changed what was already done. Ryan was dead, and the mystery of his disappearance remained. I deleted Omegle and all my social media shortly after. I didn't want any more contact with that world. And even now, weeks later, I can't stop thinking about what the stranger said. How did he know so much? And why did he choose to tell me that way? Maybe I'll never know, but the feeling that something darker was behind all of this has never left me. I just know I'll never enter an online chat again. It was a typical night, and like any other bored teenager, I decided to distract myself on the internet. I was home alone and wanted something to take my mind off the boredom. My friends weren't available, so I entered a random chat room to see what was going on. Talking to strangers online had always been a fun pastime, and even though I knew the risks, I had never encountered anything truly scary. At least, not until that night. The first few conversations were normal. Some people were just there to chat, others disconnected as soon as they appeared. It was the usual, quick laughs and weird people. But eventually a new window opened, and the user on the other side seemed different. He didn't say anything. The camera showed a middle-aged man standing in a dark room. I waited for him to say something, but the silence was absolute. "Hey, what's up?" I asked, trying to break the ice. No response. He just stared at me through the camera. I thought maybe the audio was malfunctioning, so I gestured with my hand to see if he'd react, but nothing happened. The man stayed there, staring at me with an intense look, almost as if he was studying me. His face remained motionless on the screen, until slowly, a smile crept across his lips. It was a crooked, eerie smile, as if he was enjoying something only he knew. That made me uncomfortable. "Okay, dude, this isn't funny," I said, hoping for some kind of reaction. But the man remained still, with that unsettling grin on his face. My stomach started to churn, and the atmosphere shifted completely. I didn't know what to do, but something inside me told me it was better to disconnect. Even so, curiosity held me back. I tried again. "Are you going to say something? Or just keep staring at me?" Nothing. Just silence and that disturbing smile. The tension began to suffocate me. My house was completely silent, and the only light came from the computer screen. Suddenly, I felt a growing tension in the air. The way he was watching me. It felt personal, like he knew something about me. That's when I realized it wasn't just discomfort. I was scared. I abruptly disconnected the call, not thinking twice. My heart was racing, and I tried to convince myself that it was just a creepy guy trying to scare me. But even after ending the call, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I sat for a few minutes, staring at the screen, waiting for my heart to slow down. Suddenly, my phone vibrated next to the keyboard. It was a notification. I thought it was some random message or spam, but when I looked at the screen, my blood ran cold. The message had no sender, and the only thing attached was a photo. It was a picture of me, taken at that exact moment from outside my window. The angle was perfect. I was sitting in the chair exactly as I was right then. Panic took over me. I jumped up and ran to the window. I yanked the curtain open, but all I saw outside was darkness. Nothing, no one. But the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. My mind started racing, trying to figure out how someone could have taken that photo. I was on the second floor of the house. It wasn't possible for anyone to easily access that window. Desperate, I closed all the curtains in the house, turned off the lights, and locked myself in my room. My heart was still pounding, and I gripped my phone tightly, unsure of what to do. It felt like the world around me had stopped, and every little sound was magnified. I checked the house several times, making sure the doors were locked. As I tried to process what had just happened, the phone vibrated again. This time, I hesitated before looking. Fear told me not to check, but curiosity won. The new message was just one word: like it. Below was another photo. The image showed the front of my house, clearly taken from the street. The man from the call was standing there, staring directly at the camera, with that same twisted smile on his face. I could barely breathe. I immediately called the police, trying to explain what had happened, but everything seemed so surreal that I didn't know if they believed me. When the police arrived, they searched around the house and on the street. They didn't find anyone, no trace of who could have taken the photos. The officer told me it was likely just a bad prank, someone trying to scare me. But it didn't feel like just a prank. It was something personal, something sinister. I deleted the chat app that same night and promised never to enter chat rooms with strangers again. In the days that followed, paranoia took over me. Every time I hear a noise at night, I think he might be there, outside, watching me. To this day, I still don't know who that man was or how he managed to take those photos. But every time I look at my bedroom window, I remember that sinister smile, and the feeling that I'm being watched never completely goes away. Emma and I had always loved spending time on random chat websites, especially Omegle. It was a silly way to kill time and laugh with strangers. But that night, we decided to do something different. Bored and for no real reason, we added our city to our interests just to see if we'd come across someone nearby. We were in Chattanooga, Tennessee, a big enough city that it didn't seem dangerous. Or so we thought. After some random and disjointed conversations, a stranger appeared, camera off, and sent us a link. Emma hesitated, but curiosity got the best of her. She clicked it, and a low-quality video loaded. At first, it seemed ordinary, just a random street at night. But as the camera moved, my stomach dropped. The street was ours. Emma looked at me, pale, and I could only mutter that it was a bizarre coincidence. We tried to laugh it off, but the video kept playing, showing someone walking down the sidewalk. When the camera zoomed in on our house, the panic hit instantly. In the video, the person filming was at our porch, and to our horror, the stranger knew exactly where to look. The camera shook slightly as the intruder's hand reached for the key my mom always kept hidden under a flower pot near the door. At that moment, the reality hit us like a ton of bricks. We were being watched, and someone out there knew how to get inside. Emma locked the door and started crying, while I trembled in fear. Trying to stay calm, we grabbed our phones and called the police. Time seemed to crawl, and we locked ourselves in the bathroom, clutching anything that could serve as a weapon. I kept feeling like, at any moment, we'd hear the front door creak open, footsteps echoing through the house. As we waited, I could hear Emma quietly sobbing, and I did my best not to lose it too. Those were the longest minutes of my life. When the police finally arrived, we slowly came out of the bathroom, our legs trembling. They searched every corner of the house, checked the doors and windows, but there were no signs of forced entry. The house was intact. The only thing missing was the key under the flower pot. No one had come inside, but knowing someone had been so close, knowing exactly where to look was terrifying enough. After that night, we couldn't go back on Omegle, or to any similar sites. The memory of that video, of someone watching every detail of our home, still haunts me to this day. We blocked out any recollection of the event. And above all, we decided never to trust something as seemingly innocent as an online chat room again. That was the kind of experience that makes you question just how much the internet can expose your life, and how vulnerable you really are. If you're enjoying the stories so far, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more creepy stories just like these. And hey, have you ever had a paranormal experience? Drop a comment below and share your story with us. We'd love to hear it. Now let's dive into the next story. It was a calm Tuesday, just like so many others. We were on yet another Zoom call to discuss a work project. Me, Claire, and my team were talking about deadlines and adjustments. Nothing special. The night had already fallen, and the curtains of my window were open. The dim streetlight outside was the only thing visible beyond the glass. Everything seemed normal until one of my colleagues, Max, made a comment that completely caught me off guard. "Claire, there's someone watching you through the window." I laughed, thinking he was joking. Max had always been the kind of guy who made jokes at the most inconvenient times. But when I looked at the screen, I noticed that the other faces on the call were serious too. I glanced at the window behind me, seeing nothing unusual. "Very funny, Max," I responded, trying to keep things light. But before he could say anything else, another person on the call spoke up. "No, seriously, Glide. I think I saw something move out there." My smile faded. This time, my heart sped up, and a wave of panic began to form. I slowly turned my head toward the window. There was nothing, just the darkness outside. I tried to calm myself, thinking they were just exaggerating. But then I saw it, a shadow of a head, quickly passing by the glass, as if someone was moving right outside, close to the window. It seemed impossible, but several other colleagues confirmed it, typing frantically in the chat, alarmed. My stomach twisted in fear. I stood up slowly, grabbing a kitchen knife nearby, and walked cautiously toward the window. I tried to appear brave, but my whole body was shaking. I approached, carefully looking outside, trying to spot any sign of movement. Nothing. No person, no shadow, just the empty sidewalk and the wind rustling the trees. My heart was still racing, but I tried to convince myself that it must have been a trick of the light or some kind of reflection. "There's no one here," I said, returning to the camera, trying to stay calm even though everyone on the call still looked worried. That night, I locked all the doors and windows before going to bed. I still felt a lingering unease, but I tried to forget about what had happened. I convinced myself that if someone had been outside, they couldn't have gotten away that quickly. It must have been a misunderstanding. For a few days, everything seemed to go back to normal. The work routine continued, and the memory of that Zoom call began to fade into the distance. But then, something happened. I woke up one morning and immediately felt that something was wrong. The back door was slightly ajar, and the realization that someone had entered my home hit me like a punch. Someone had been inside. My hands shook as I called the police, trying to stay calm, but the fear was paralyzing. I had no idea what the intruders had done or what they might have been looking for. The police arrived quickly, and after searching the house, they confirmed my worst fear. There were clear signs of forced entry. They found drawers rummaged through and things out of place. But the worst part came when one of them mentioned something even stranger had been left behind. DNA traces were found on my underwear, which had been carelessly tossed on the floor of my bedroom. That sickening detail made me feel completely exposed. The investigation moved quickly, thanks to the DNA. In just a few days, the police identified a suspect. It was a man with a criminal record, someone who had been arrested for similar acts before. The most terrifying detail? Neighbors had reported seeing the same man peeking through windows of various homes in the neighborhood, including mine weeks before. When the officer showed me his picture, the fear hit me again like a wave. It was him, the same man that somehow all my colleagues had seen in the shadow behind me during that Zoom call. The police believe he had been watching me for longer than I had realized, waiting for the right moment to break in. Whatever he had been planning that night, I was incredibly lucky not to have been alone when he tried to get closer. Maybe my colleagues' warnings had scared him off, stopping him from doing something far worse that first time. The man was arrested, but the feeling of safety never fully returned. Every noise in the house at night, every shadow I see through the window, brings back the panic from that night. I can't sleep with the curtains open anymore, and even video calls make me nervous. The thought that someone could be watching, lurking, waiting, never leaves my mind. I used to think that stories about stalkers and intruders were just exaggerated horror movie plots. Now I know that real terror is much quieter, and that it can be just outside your window. It was an ordinary night, like so many others. I was bored with nothing much to do, so I decided to hop into a chat room. Talking to strangers online had always been a quick, no-strings-attached distraction. Sometimes I come across funny conversations, other times just weird ones. Nothing out of the ordinary. But that night, something changed. Something I'd never be able to forget. After a few dull conversations, a new window opened. The camera showed a young girl, probably around my age. She looked nervous, constantly glancing to the sides as if expecting something or someone. I didn't think much of it at first. She just seemed anxious, or maybe shy. "Hey, how's it going?" I asked, trying to start some casual small talk. She responded quickly, her voice low and shaky. I think someone's following me." I was a bit confused. Most people on Omegle joke around or make bizarre comments, so my first reaction was to think it was just another prank. I smiled, assuming she was trying to scare me or pull some kind of joke. "Really?" "Oh," I asked, trying to keep the tone light. But her expression didn't change. She kept looking around, as if checking her surroundings every few seconds. Her breathing was quick, and though I tried to convince myself this was all just an act, something in her eyes made me hesitate. It seemed too real. "They're watching me. I know they are." She glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting to see someone behind her. I try to break the tension. Okay, this is starting to feel like a horror movie, don't you think? She ignored me, almost as if she hadn't heard. I'm somewhere safe right now, but I think they'll find me. I don't know what to do. The situation was starting to feel uncomfortable. I was still trying to convince myself it was a prank, but the pure terror in her eyes made me question everything. I tried to think of something to say, but before I could respond, the connection started to glitch. The image froze, and the screen went static for a few seconds. When the connection came back, the screen was dark, but I could still hear her shaky breathing. I was about to type something when the screen went completely black, and the call was cut off. Strange, but not uncommon for online chats, so I didn't think much of it. But that's when I noticed something that made my heart race. At the bottom of the screen, where the other person's location normally appears, I saw something unexpected. Somehow, it showed the name of my town. I paused for a moment. My town wasn't large, and the idea that this girl, who seemed terrified, could be so close left me uneasy. Still, I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe the location system was faulty, or someone was using a VPN with the same location as mine. I turned off the computer and tried to put it out of my mind, but the feeling of unease lingered. That girl had seemed genuinely scared, and that bizarre coincidence with the location. I couldn't shake the weirdness. I barely slept that night. Every noise in the house, every shadow passing by the window, kept me on edge. Maybe I was being paranoid, but something felt off. The next morning, while I was having breakfast, I heard the television in the background. It was the local news. I wasn't paying much attention until something caught my eye. The face of a girl. I looked at the screen, and there she was. The same girl I had spoken to the night before, now in a missing persons report. The news anchor mentioned that she had last been seen that very night, near a park just a few miles from where I lived. I froze, and the coffee cup nearly slipped from my hand. It was impossible. I had spoken to her. That girl had been in a panic, and now she was missing. I tried to piece it together in my mind, but nothing made sense. Had she been asking me for help? Or was it just a truly creepy coincidence? I began to wonder if I should tell someone about the conversation. But who would believe me? Saying that I had talked to a missing girl just hours before she disappeared through an anonymous chat site sounded absurd. I spent the rest of the day replaying the conversation over and over in my head. I remembered the tone of her voice, the fear in her eyes, and above all, her location showing up as the same as mine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I should have done something. I should have taken her seriously, should have asked more questions. But now it was too late. In the weeks that followed, her story continued to make headlines in the local news, but no solid leads ever came up. The mystery of the girl's disappearance only deepened, and with each news report, the guilt and fear inside me grew. I kept thinking about the last thing she said before the connection failed. They'll find me. To this day, I don't know who or what was following her, and I don't know if I'll ever find out. But every night, before I fall asleep, I wonder whether they're still around. That night, I was home alone, as usual. The routine had become dull, and as had recently become a habit, I logged into a chat room to pass the time and talk to strangers. I didn't expect anything special, just the usual. Shallow conversations, bad jokes, and eventually disconnecting without a second thought. But this time was different. Very different. A woman appeared on the screen. She hadn't turned on her camera, but the conversation started smoothly. There was something strange and, at the same time, familiar about the way she typed. Her comments and questions weren't like those of the other users. She seemed close. It was as if she knew exactly how to make me feel at ease, as if she knew my tastes, my interests. The conversation flowed in a disconcerting way. "You grew up in that two-story house on Willow Street, didn't you?" she suddenly asked. My heart stopped for a second. The house where I grew up as a child was on Willow Street, but I had never mentioned that anywhere. My mind scrambled to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe I had mentioned it online at some point and forgot. But the discomfort grew. "How do you know that?" I asked, trying to stay calm. She laughed, but it was a laugh that left me uneasy. "I know a lot more than that, John." When she said my name, without me giving it, The feeling that something was very wrong overwhelmed me. She started describing specific details about my childhood. She remembered how I used to hide my favorite toys in the basement because I was afraid my brothers would break them. She mentioned my dog, Max, who died when I was 7. And most frightening of all, she spoke about the little room under the stairs where I used to hide as a child whenever I heard my parents arguing. I had never told anyone about that. My heart was pounding, and my fingers were sweaty as I typed the next question. "Who are you?" She hesitated for a moment, and then she typed something that completely froze me. "I'm someone who's always been by your side, even if you didn't realize it." I began to feel a strange familiarity in her words, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. I asked directly, "How do you know all this about me?" Her response was vague but terrifying. "Sometimes the past doesn't stay as far away as we think." I wanted to end the conversation, but at the same time, I needed to understand. I needed an explanation. Suddenly, she started talking about my mother. She mentioned how she used to comb my hair before sending me off to school, and the last time she hugged me, just before I left for college. Intimate details, things only my mother would know. "Who are you?" I asked again, this time more desperately. She stayed silent for a moment, then slowly responded, "You already know, John." My entire body went cold. The memory of my mother, who had passed away 10 years ago, pierced my mind like a blade. Before I could type another word, the connection dropped. The screen went black, and no matter how much I tried to reconnect, I couldn't. The woman's profile had vanished. I sat there, stunned, staring at the screen. My mind was spinning. How could someone know so many details? Who was she? In a sudden rush of unease, I went to the basement and started rummaging through boxes of old photos. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I felt like I had to find something. I was going through a dusty box when a photo slipped to the floor. It was a picture of my mother, probably taken shortly before she passed. When I picked it up and looked at it more closely, the shock was inevitable. The woman I had spoken to had her face. The hair, the eyes, the smile. She looked exactly like my mother. I felt the air leave my lungs as my mind refused to accept what I was seeing. How was this possible? My mother had been dead for 10 years. I had been to the funeral. I saw her body. And yet, I had spoken to someone who knew everything about me. Someone who looked just like her. I sat on the floor, staring at the photo for minutes, unable to process what it all meant. Could it have been some bizarre coincidence? Someone trying to manipulate me? Or was there something more? The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Whatever it was, something inside me told me that conversation wasn't over. The doubt haunts me to this day. I don't know if it was really my mother, some kind of psychological trick, or something I will never be able to explain. But one thing is certain. That woman knew more than anyone else could. And part of me believes that somehow I spoke to my mother that night, or to whatever remained of her. It all started innocuously, like most strange things do. I was in a chat room, talking with strangers while trying to fix an issue with my laptop that had been bothering me for days. The system was sluggish, and commands were constantly freezing. Frustrated, I casually mentioned this in the conversation. That's when a guy, calling himself Alex, offered to help. He seemed to know what he was doing, explaining that he could guide me through solving the problem. Up to that point, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. People often help each other with tech issues online, right? He suggested that I install a remote access program, something he could use to see my computer and fix everything. I was a bit hesitant, but he sounded convincing, and I was impatient to get the problem solved, so I agreed. After installing the program, Alex began working on my system, clicking through files and folders with an expertise that impressed me. He seemed to know exactly what he was doing, deleting unnecessary files and adjusting system settings. Everything started working normally again, and I thanked him. He signed off, saying that if I needed anything else, he'd be around. Everything seemed fixed, and I shut down the laptop feeling relieved. That night, something strange happened. I woke up in the middle of the night with a weird feeling. My room was dark, except for the glow of my laptop, which had turned on by itself. I was certain I had shut it down before going to bed. My heart began to race when I realized the laptop's camera was on, the small green light shining like a beacon in the darkness. I tried to convince myself it was just a bug, something that happens with computers sometimes. But as I approached the screen, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. There were photos of me, taken while I was sleeping. My face, lit by the glow of the laptop, my eyes closed. And the most disturbing part, the screen was showing new photos being taken in real time, without me touching anything. I froze, watching as more images appeared on the screen. The last one showed the outside of my house, taken from the perspective of someone standing outside, looking in through the window of my bedroom. A wave of absolute terror washed over me. Who was taking these photos? How could someone be outside? My dog, Rex, suddenly started barking furiously, as if he had sensed something outside. The sound echoed through the house, breaking the silence of the night. I rushed to the window, still groggy with sleep and confusion, but there was nothing. No sign of movement, just the calm darkness of the street. Yet, Rex's aggressive barking kept me on high alert. He wasn't a dog who barked without reason, and his behavior that night was different, like he was protecting the house from an invisible threat. I shut down the laptop, my heart pounding. In that moment, I realized how foolish I had been. I had allowed a complete stranger to take full control of my computer, and now it seemed like he was using my own technology against me. Every passing second made me feel more vulnerable, like I was being watched from somewhere, observed closely by someone I couldn't see. I stayed up the rest of the night, with Rex by my side, the laptop closed, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I knew that if I didn't act quickly, the situation could get even worse. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't trust that laptop anymore. Not after what had happened. I left home without telling anyone, taking Rex with me, and checked into a motel on the other side of town. I didn't want to take any chances. Before leaving, I grabbed the laptop and with a burst of anger, destroyed it. I smashed the screen, ripped out the keyboard, anything to ensure that whoever had been watching me would no longer have access. There was no other choice. I had to sever that connection with the hacker in any way possible. After days of hiding, I returned home to collect some things and realized nothing had been physically stolen. But the trauma of that night remained vivid. The feeling of being watched, of being manipulated, never really went away. I began to wonder just how far that man had gone. He knew where I lived. He knew my habits, and most terrifyingly, he knew exactly how to watch me without my knowledge. I've never entered a chat room since then. Every time I use a new computer, I make sure to cover the camera and keep security measures at their highest. The thought that somewhere, someone could be watching, waiting for another chance to invade my life, still haunts me. I escaped just in time, but now I know that surveillance is never as distant as we think. It all started innocently enough, or at least that's how it seemed. After my divorce, my life was a mess. I was emotionally fragile and trying to keep it together for the custody battle over my daughter. During that time, I started playing Counter-Strike more frequently, using it as a distraction from all the stress. That's when I met Amanda. She was funny, quick with a shot, and always seemed to have a kind word when I needed it. At first, her company was a kind of relief amid the whirlwind of emotions I was going through. Our conversations began to extend beyond the game. Amanda started messaging me outside of matches, offering advice, listening to my frustrations, and genuinely seemed to care about my well-being. I was grateful to have someone to talk to during one of the hardest times in my life. The problem was over time that attention started to feel too much. The messages, once occasional, became constant. She would text me at all hours of the day, and if I didn't reply quickly, she would act strangely, as if I was ignoring her on purpose. I thought it was just excessive concern, but things took a darker turn. Amanda began asking invasive questions about my divorce, my ex-wife, and the custody battle for my daughter. At first, I thought she was just trying to help, but her intentions became increasingly unclear. One day, I received a message from Amanda saying she had found my ex-wife's social media profile. She started pushing me to let her handle things for me. I had no idea what she was planning, but I firmly asked her to stop. The last thing I needed was someone, barely more than a stranger, meddling in an already delicate situation. But Amanda didn't listen. She began contacting my ex-wife, saying things that almost sabotaged my custody case. My ex was furious, thinking I was behind it all, manipulating the situation. It was days of pure hell trying to explain that I had nothing to do with it, that Amanda was just an online acquaintance who had crossed all boundaries. It nearly cost me my ex's trust, and by extension, my daughter. I knew I had to cut Amanda off completely. I blocked her on all social media, stopped playing Counter-Strike, and changed my contacts. For a while, life seemed to return to normal. I thought she had gotten the message, that it had all been a misunderstanding, and she would move on. But then, the situation escalated into something I could never have imagined. One day, during a work meeting on Zoom, while we were discussing important projects, someone hijacked the meeting. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. But then, I saw Amanda's image flash onto the screen, and my heart sank. She had somehow found the meeting link and was there in front of all my colleagues, desperately trying to get my attention. She stared at me with a crazed look, accusing me of abandoning her, of being ungrateful for all the support she had given me. I didn't know what to do. The entire meeting was a disaster, and my co-workers were completely bewildered by what they were witnessing. It was both embarrassing and terrifying. I had never experienced anything like it. All I could do was end the call and once again block any access Amanda might have to my life. But the feeling of dread lingered. That's when I received a call from an unknown number. It was Amanda's mother. She sounded distressed and explained that Amanda had struggled with severe psychiatric issues in the past, and her mental health had deteriorated recently. Her family had no idea the extent of Amanda's obsessions until that moment. They were taking steps to address it, and shortly after, she was admitted to a psychiatric clinic for treatment. Hearing this, I felt relieved to be free of that nightmare, but at the same time, I couldn't shake a mixture of pity and fear. Amanda clearly needed help. I could no longer see her as just a threat, but as someone battling demons that no one around her had noticed until it was too late. Her obsession with me was just a symptom of something much deeper, something neither I nor her family had realized in time. Since then, my life has slowly returned to some kind of normal, though the scars from that experience remain. I focused on my work and my daughter, keeping a healthy distance from online interactions. What I've learned from all of this is that what starts as a friendship can quickly turn dangerous, especially when mental health issues are involved, and that you should never ignore warning signs, no matter how harmless they might seem at first. Amanda was hospitalized, and I hope she's getting the treatment she needs. But the feeling of being watched, of having my life invaded, has never completely gone away. And even now, every time I join a Zoom meeting, I can't shake the feeling that someone somewhere is trying to come back. If you enjoyed these true horror stories, you won't want to miss our next video. Check out 10 creepy true Walmart horror stories, scary stories, compilation by clicking the card on the screen or finding it as the previous video on our channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments if you've ever had a paranormal experience. We'd love to hear your stories. Stay brave, and we'll see you in the next video.